2 Samuel chapter 17 here this evening. We're going to blow through the end of 17 and go right into 18. 2 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to pick up in verse 24 in just a moment. Just by way of getting a running start, Israel is in a divided state. Much of Israel, the vast majority of her armies, have cast in their lot with Absalom, the crown prince who has led a revolt against his father David. Absalom is reigning currently from Jerusalem, but that's going to change in the first verse we read this evening. But there are still those who are loyal to David, even in Jerusalem. He has a spy network that is funneling him information of what's going on inside Absalom's, inside of his cabinet meetings, if you want to call them that, his council. Absalom disregarded the strategically sound advice of Ahithophel. Ahithophel said, hey, give me 12,000 men. I'll go after David while he's on the run. I'll catch up with him. I'll wipe him out. You'll have the throne. It'll be simple. Well, it wouldn't have been simple, but it very likely would have worked had he been able to do it. But that's not what happened. Rather, Absalom listened to David's, we're calling him David's mole, within the administration. His name is Hushai. He gave advice in verses 7 to verse 13. Hushai bought David precious time. Time that he could put distance between himself and the forces of Absalom. By telling Absalom, this is Hushai's advice. He said, Ahithophel's advice, it's good, but not right now. What you need to do, you don't need 12,000 men. You need all the soldiers of Israel. And you don't need Ahithophel to lead them. You should lead them. So kind of appealing to the vanity of Absalom, which we know he dealt with. He said, you should lead them. And so Absalom and his council said, sounds like a good idea. Ahithophel, we dealt with this last week, he saw when his counsel was forsaken and Hushai's was adopted, Ahithophel saw that the initiative had been lost. David would be able to establish defenses and fight, and he would ultimately win. Ahithophel saw in that moment, he saw it's all over. It may take some time, but David's going to win this thing. And so Ahithophel returned to his home in verse 23, and he committed suicide. Hushai got word to David of what was going on, of the plan that had been adopted, and David slipped across the Jordan River to the east. But now we see the battle lines being drawn up in verse 24. Then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom passed over Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. So David gets to a town just in time for Absalom to cross over. David is able to make it to this city. Now, Mahanaim, if you remember that town, you should. It's on the eastern shore. That would be modern-day Jordan. In this day, it was under Israelite control. Mahanaim is where Ishbosheth, who was the son of Saul, had set up his government. Right after the death of Saul, when David ruled in Hebron, Ishbosheth ruled from Mahanaim. So you've heard that name before. This is the city that David had reached in the time that was bought by Hushai's counsel. This is where he was able to get to. This was the best case scenario that he could find. And so Absalom is now coming after David in his attempt to secure the throne to himself in uncontested rule. Verse 25. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the host instead of Joab, which Amasa was a man's son whose name was Ithra, an Israelite that went in to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister to Zeruiah, Joab's mother. This is one of those passages where we have the family tree getting all thrown up in front of us. Amasa is the son of Abigail. Do you see that there in that verse? He's the son of Abigail, who is sister, the last phrase, sister to Zeruiah. Who else has Zeruiah as a sister? David. David is also Zeruiah's sister. So Abigail is also David's sister, or perhaps half-sister, if you want to go along some lines of thought. If we read in 1 Chronicles 2:15, we read, David the seventh, this is listing the children of Jesse, David the seventh, whose sisters were Zeruiah and Abigail, and the sons of Zeruiah, Abishai and Joab and Asahel, 3. Amasa is David's nephew, which, if you remember, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel are also David's nephew. Asahel was killed by Abner, but Joab and Abishai are David's nephews. So this is very much all in the family. Are you seeing that? Very much all within the family. So Amasa's mother, Abigail, David's sister, his father is Ithra. And there's something kind of interesting about him. You look there in verse 25 where it talks about Ithra. It says Ithra was an Israelite. If we go to 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 17, we read, and Abigail bare Amasa, and the father of Amasa was Jether, the Ishmaelite. Well, this is not a contradiction. Many of them had two names, as you've picked up on, no doubt. So what we have is a man named Ithra, who also goes by the name of Jether. He is an Ishmaelite by birth, but he is an Israelite by religion, making him we've talked about this on Sunday mornings, he's a proselyte. He would be a Gentile convert to Judaism, as it would exist in that day. He's a Gentile convert to following Jehovah. So, we have Joab, who is with David, his nephew. He was David's commander-in-chief of the army. But when he left with David, and the army is left there with Absalom, Absalom has to appoint a new commander. So he finds another of his cousins, Amasa, the son of Abigail, and appoints him as replacement to command the army. Verse 26, so Israel and Absalom pitched in the land of Gilead. So let me show you here real quick where we are. So you see Mahanaim right there on the map? If you look right above that, there's a word that runs north to south. Do you see it? Gilead? Okay. The forest of Gilead would be right in this area. It's called the forest of Ephraim because it's in Ephraim's domain. But right here is where the battle is going to happen. So if you're looking at the map, the forces of Absalom coming from Jerusalem, they have gotten to the north of David. So the battle is going to happen. David is going to come out of Mahanaim, and he's going to clash with the forces in the forest of Ephraim here in just a few moments. But we see first off David's provision. There's something significant about this. These names that we're about to look at are names that we can easily just skip over, but you'll notice some of them. You'll recognize some of them. God is going to send David provision and aid from some surprising sources. Look at verse 27. And it came to pass, when David was come to Mahanaim, that Shobi, the son of Nahash of Rabbah of the children of Ammon, okay, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to deal with him first. Shobi is an Ammonite. Now there's something significant about him because he's one of the sons, here according to verse 27, Shobi, the son of Nahash of Rabbah. Where do we know the name Nahash of Rabbah? Well, Nahash is the king of the Ammonites who was ruling from Rabbah, which is the city that David was besieging in 2 Samuel 11. There's a relationship there between conqueror David and the conquered Nahash. Apparently, David treated them with respect. We're not told exactly how this relationship worked, but for this man, Shobi, an Ammonite, the son of a defeated king, in David's hour of trial and trouble, for him to come with aid, speaks well. It's kind of living proof of Proverbs 16, verse 7, that says, when a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. That's happening. We see David is receiving aid from a people who he had defeated in battle just a few chapters earlier, some years prior, but kind of interesting. So the first source of his aid is Shobi. Then we have Machir, the son of Amiel of Lodebar. Remember with me here for just a second. I know we're in 2 Samuel 17, but I want you to remember with me all the way back to 2 Samuel 9, when David came into the throne, and he started looking around because he had made a covenant with Jonathan, the son of Saul. Do you remember this? And he went looking around, he said, is there any descendant of Jonathan who I can show mercy to? Because I made a covenant with his father, and I'm looking for the descendants of Jonathan. Well, if you remember that, then perhaps you'll remember that Ziba, who we've already talked about here in this chapter, who was a servant of Saul's house, he came forward and he said that Jonathan had a son who was lame in his feet. His name was Mephibosheth. Okay, you remember this. Listen to 2 Samuel 9:4. And the king said unto him, where is he? Well, Ziba said unto the king, behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lodebar. You see the connection? It's the same guy. Machir, the son of Amiel of Lodebar, was the man who had been the protector and guardian of Mephibosheth before David found him. And now, when David is on the ropes, as it were, when David is on the run, and he's living in Mahanaim, we have Machir steps up and he says, I'm going to help him out. I know the character of this king. I know David, and I'm going to stand firm by his side. The last one here, interesting that Machir had not forgotten the kindness that had gone years before. The last one that we have here is Barzillai, the Gileadite of Rogelim. Barzillai, if you look ahead in chapter 19, verse 32, he's 80 years old. He's 80 years old, and his loyalty and his desire to help David is of special note. Now, we don't know anything about him up until this point, but we're going to read about him in the future. As a matter of fact, David is going to make commandment to Solomon when he passes off of the scene of authority. He's going to make provision for Barzillai because of what he does here. And what exactly do these three men do? Well, verse 28, they brought beds and basins and earthen vessels and wheat and barley and flour and parched corn and beans and lentils and parched pulse and honey and butter and sheep and cheese of kine for David and for the people that were with him to eat. For they said, the people is hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. They stepped up. When David's got his back against the wall, these men, kind of surprisingly for some of them, step up, come to his aid, and provide him material support in a very desperate time. It was in light of this that many commentators believe David wrote Psalm 121. I'm going to read it to you. If you'd like, you can turn there. But listen to the context. In context of David in Mahanaim, with help coming and his son bringing an army against him, listen to this. Psalm 121, verse 1. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth, and even forever. Do you see the connection between that and the situation that he's facing? I didn't tell you, and I don't have pictures of it because, again, it's in Jordan, so we didn't go there when we were over there. But Mahanaim is kind of in a valley, or in a carve out, a ravine, and there's the hills all around it. And so when David says, "I lift up my eyes and look to the hills, from whence comes my help," he's talking about the aid that the Lord sent to him. These three men, unsuspecting, who came to his aid. Let's look at David's army, because now everything is set. David is secure there in Mahanaim. And now it's time for him to set up his army, because Absalom will be upon him soon. Verse 1 of chapter 18. And David numbered the people that were with him, and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them. Very similar to how all armies do. You have, think of it as commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers and battalion chiefs and whatnot. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother. Okay, so who are they again? What's their relation to David? They are nephews. This dividing of the army into three is not unusual. It's very common in the culture. Strategically, it's a good idea. In this battle, it's going to play a pivotal role because of the landscape where they're fighting. The last part of the army, the third, part goes to Joab, who had been the commander of the host. Part goes to Abishai, his brother. And part of it goes to Ittai, the Gittite. Now, you remember what a Gittite is? It's someone who hails from the city of Gath. Which is, we know a famous man from Gath. He was 9 feet tall. His name was Goliath. Ittai is a Philistine. Ittai is a mercenary. But if you remember and you look back, you saw that he really joined up with David. He said, look, I might not have been here as long as some of the others, but I'm with you. He had dedicated himself to the service of David, sworn allegiance, even though he hadn't been in his service very long. You can read about it in chapter 15. So we have the two very battle-proven nephews, and Ittai, the head of a Philistine mercenary force, as well as some other Israelites. But David has one more plan that he's going to enact here. It says there at the end of verse 2, and the king, David, said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. Wait a minute. What? Now, is David an accomplished leader of men in battle? Absolutely. That's why he's not allowed to build the temple, because he shed much blood. David came into the national eye by killing Goliath, and he's killed countless since then. David is a man of war. He knows how to fight. He's very good at it. But the people answered him in verse 3, and they give him some pushback. And the people answered, thou shalt not go forth. That's not typically the response that a king gets, but they give it to him. For if we flee away, they will not care for us. Neither if half of us die will they care for us. But now thou art worth 10,000 of us. Therefore now it is better that thou succor us out of the city. They immediately opposed David's plan to ride into battle at the front of his army. I don't know if you've noticed, the Israelite army of yesteryear lost lots of officers. Kings died because they led their men into battle. If you've been watching the news, you have noticed that a fair number of Israelite generals and colonels and high-ranking officers, since the attack that took place on October 7th, Israel has lost a lot of high-ranking officers. And the reason for that is because Israeli officers lead their men from the front. They take them into battle, and because of that, many of them pass away as a result of the conflict. And David is keeping that, he's one of the originators of that tradition. But Absalom is fighting for one purpose. What is the one goal that Absalom has as he fights against the forces of his father? He's got to get rid of his father. If he can just kill David, that's all that he has to accomplish. And if it costs the lives of many others, that's okay. If it costs the lives of quite a few of his own troops, that's a sacrifice he's willing to make. He has to get rid of David, because if he can get rid of David, again, he's the crown prince who's already been kind of taken over the throne, so he will be able to ride in and hold authority unchallenged. And so David's men, his allies, tell him that this is one battle that you have to lead from the back. You can't come out with us, because all the forces of Absalom are going to be looking for you. I had the thought as I was reading over this. You read, look at the end of verse 2. Read what David said. He says, I will surely go forth with you myself also. Do you remember the last time that David shirked a battle and he didn't go in with his army? It was in 2 Samuel 11. You remember? They were fighting against the Ammonites in Rabbah, and that's when all of this mess started. All of this began because David wasn't where he was supposed to be. I almost wonder, and I don't have it on biblical authority, but I wonder if maybe that was in the back of David's mind. Maybe he was thinking, I'm not staying home this time. I'm going to go out here and I'm going to fight. I'm going to be there with my men. Nonetheless, he does see the wisdom of the advice that he's being given by his officers and men. Verse 4, and the king said unto them, what seemeth you best I will do. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. So kind of the grand procession of the soldiers going forth to war. And David is going to give some special instructions regarding Absalom. It matters how he gives these and where he gives these. David is standing in the gate as his army passes before him. Verse 5, and the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai. He calls his commanders to him and he gives them this instruction. He gives it to them publicly. He says, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. It matters that all the people heard. That's going to play into what we see in just a moment. His desire regarding the traitor is known by the foot soldiers. He uses the phrase there in verse 5, the young man. Deal gently with the young man. He uses that same phrase in verse 12, verse 29, and verse 32. It seems that David still has the idea that restoration is possible. He's still viewing Solomon, his 28-year-old son, if Usher's dates are correct. David would be 60 at this time. He still looks at his 28-year-old son as kind of impulsive. You know, he does crazy things. He's out of line right now. You almost get that feeling. Seems like he's going to hope for restoration. But that time has passed. That ship sailed. Absalom's revolt, and if you remember, his public defiling of David's concubines was a point from which there could be no retreat. There's no going back after you've done what Absalom has done. After you have despised your father publicly, after you've publicly gone against the king, there's no coming back from that. But David is desiring to avoid the loss of yet another son. Remember, he lost Amnon. He lost the infant son that he had with Bathsheba. He's trying to avoid losing another son, so he issues a capture order rather than a kill order for Absalom. And that brings us to the battle of Mount Ephraim, verse 6. So the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. And there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was scattered over the face of all the country, and the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. The woods of Ephraim are dense. They're difficult to maneuver. I was looking for a picture to show you. I wasn't able to find one that was high enough quality to put on a screen and blow up for you. But look it up at home. Find the woods of Ephraim. They're dense woods. They would be hard to track a deer through. They would be hard to hike through. They're certainly hard to move forces through. Big forces. Which again, the forces of Absalom, it's a big army. Remember? Because Hushai said, you need to get a bunch of men together. It's a big army and it's being led by one man, Amasa. The forces of David have been divided. They were smaller to begin with. Then they were divided into three different forces, led by Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. they're able to move. They're able to respond much better than the massive force of Absalom as they kind of bumble through the woods. The forces of David rout and destroy the armies of Absalom. Again, this is Israelites killing Israelites. This is civil war that we have going on right here. Verse 9, and Absalom met the servants of David. And Absalom rode upon a mule. That's the traditional mode of conveyance for royalty. They didn't ride on horses. The kings and the princes rode on mules specifically rather than horses. I don't know the reason, but we do find it in history as well as in Scripture. And Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. Absalom's trying to retreat, and his hair gets caught. Almost certainly it was his hair. In chapter 14, verse 26, you remember he had lots of hair. Hair that he would pull at the end of every year, meaning he would get it cut and then he would weigh it. And it was kind of a big deal, Absalom's hair. And so as he's riding under this, with his long flowing locks behind him, it bumps up into the boughs of an oak tree. And he's stuck, but the mule doesn't know that, so the mule just keeps riding. And so you have Absalom hung there in midair with a massive battle raging all around him. Verse 10. And a certain man saw it, and told Joab, and said, Behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. And Joab said unto the man that told him, And behold, thou sawest him? And why didst thou not smite him there to the ground? And I would have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. So, get the picture. I mean, the battle's going on. Absalom's over here swinging from a tree by his hair. And one of David's men looks over. He sees what's going on. And he doesn't stick around. He doesn't necessarily deal gently with Absalom either, right? Because David had commanded, what would the gentle thing to do to a man who's hanging by his hair from an oak tree? What would the gentle thing be? Go cut the man down, right? But he doesn't do that. Rather, he goes to Joab and he says, I saw Absalom hanging from a tree. And Joab's response is, why are you here? Is he still alive? Yeah, I left him there. He's swinging in the tree. If you would have killed him, I would have given you, he says, I'd have given you these 10 shekels of silver and a girdle, or an ornate piece of clothing. 10 shekels is approximately 4 ounces, by the way. That matters because in verse 12, the man said unto Joab, Though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in thine hand, that's 25 pounds. 4 ounces, I wouldn't do it for 25 pounds, yet would I not put forth mine hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee, and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Beware that thou touch, that none touch the young man Absalom. Again, David gave his instructions. The capture, don't kill order. He'd given that instruction publicly, and this man heard it. And it was noised among the troops, hey, if you get Absalom, don't kill him. And so when this young man came to Joab, Joab was upset. Apparently, this soldier also did not have tremendous confidence in Joab's integrity. How about you? Do you have confidence in Joab's integrity? Given what you know of Joab, I'm kind of iffy on him. Verse 13, this is his reasoning. I didn't kill him, and I wouldn't take your money. Otherwise, I should have wrought falsehood against mine own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and thou thyself wouldst have set thyself against me. In other words, if I'd have killed Absalom, the king would have found out, and you wouldn't be running to my defense, would you, Joab? He's probably right. Do you think Joab would have sold this man down the river? I think he would have. Okay? Verse 14. Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. Or we would say, I don't have time for this. And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. Darts or javelins or spears. He puts an end to Absalom's treason as he dangles in an oak tree by his hair. Verse 15, And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. very likely the 3 spears to the heart did the job, but they kind of made sure that Absalom was not going to be a problem. And suddenly, the battle's over. Look at verse 16. And Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel, for Joab held the people back. Because why? Well, because when Absalom's dead, there's no reason for further bloodshed. Absalom was fighting so that he could sit on the throne. That's not possible anymore. He's dead. So let's stop this killing of our kin. Again, this is Israelites killing Israelites. He puts a stop to the battle that's raging through the woods of Ephraim. It would have taken a little bit of time, but the trumpet blast would carry, and then word of mouth. Now, I find myself in a difficult position right now because I kind of agree with Joab on this. Joab is far from an ideal leader, but in this instance, I believe that the case can be made that he acted appropriately. David very obviously has a weak spot when it comes to the correction of his children. Have you noticed that? He doesn't do well. He let Amnon get away with raping one of his daughters, Tamar. He let Absalom get away with murder, literally. David has a weak spot. He's got a blind spot when it comes to his kids. And because David was not willing to correct his children, the unpleasant task fell to others. I don't believe that in this case Joab was being bloodthirsty. I think Joab saw the man who had caused the trouble, the turmoil, the chaos, the bloodshed, the murder the killing of Israelites by Israelites, and he said, we've got to stop this. The only way this is going to end is not by Joab coming and David trying to make up with him. We've got to get rid of Absalom. And so Joab killed the son of David. Verse 17, and they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the wood, and laid a great heap of stones upon him. And all Israel went every one to his tent. I was reading, culturally speaking, it's typical when Israelites have someone who they do not like. They will cast their body into a pit, and then they'll throw rocks on it, and it kind of raises a heap of rocks. But everybody who walks past that heap of rocks will throw their rock on. So the rock pile is kind of perpetually getting bigger because people are remembering who's under the pile. And so Absalom's under a pile of rocks in the woods of Ephraim. It's interesting, the information that's given to us in verse 18. So there's a pile of rocks, and Absalom's at the bottom of it. Verse 18 tells us, now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale, that's outside of Jerusalem. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. Now Absalom did have 3 sons. Chapter 14, verse 27 tells us that, but it would be assumed that since he said this, they probably died in infancy or in childhood. I have no son to keep my name in remembrance, and he called the pillar after his own name, and it was called unto this day Absalom's place. To secure his legacy, because he doesn't have a son to carry his name, Absalom puts this pillar up, a monument to himself outside of Jerusalem. But the ultimate monument to Absalom and his foolish life is not a pillar outside of Jerusalem. It's a pile of rocks in the woods of Ephraim. We ended last week with the death of Ahithophel by suicide. We end this week with the death of Absalom, taken justly by Joab in time of war. We're going to read more. There's more about this that we'll look at in chapter 18. But I want you to notice as we close out this evening, in the life of David, we've seen the consequences of his sin, especially and particularly his sin with Bathsheba in chapter 11. Have you noticed how his life has just come unraveled since chapter 11? We've seen the consequences of his sin, but we've also seen, in the life of David, we've seen the good relationships that he has formed benefit him in time of trouble. We've seen that multiple times, where David did right by so-and-so, and when David got his back against the wall, they come and they help him. In his time of trouble, David looks to God, and God sent help. God sent people to help David, many times whom David had helped in another setting. With Absalom, we see kind of the other side of that. With Absalom, we see a young man who tried hard to establish his legacy and push, shove, fight his way into personal advancement, regardless of who gets hurt along the way. And his life ends, and it's tragically appropriate that the symbol of which he was the most proud, his hair, oddly enough, became his undoing. In this battle against David, it ends up being what knocked him off of his high mule, not high horse in this case, and brought about his destruction. Which brings us, I'll close with this verse, Proverbs 13:15. Good understanding giveth favor. That's David. But the way of the transgressors is hard. That's Absalom. And we see that just played out. It's laid out for us in living color here in Scripture. Absalom has lived for himself, and he dies by himself in the woods there in Ephraim. And we'll see what happens. Read ahead. I would encourage you. Read starting in verse 19. What happens after this is strange. There's messengers sent. There are messengers sent who have no message. And they're going to go to David. It's interesting. David's reasoning and then David's response, I would make the case, is absolutely uncalled for. David is going to, once again, he's going to take a misstep here in chapter 18. Read ahead and you'll see what I'm talking about. But any questions that you have here this evening relating to David and Absalom, and now the death of Absalom? Any thoughts, questions, comments? All right. Well, I hope it will help to put all of the pieces together as we read through 2 Samuel the next time, that it will make a little bit more sense to you, and that you'll be able to picture, especially as we put up the maps and whatnot, that you'll be able to picture exactly where things happen. Let's bow for a word of prayer this evening. Our Father in heaven, once again, we thank you for the privilege to gather together, to fellowship, Lord, to look into your word and to learn from the accounts of men and women of old. Lord, I pray that we would learn the lessons from the life of David. Lord, that we would understand the good and the bad lessons. Lord, the things that were done right, especially by David, and you were able to bless him. And Lord, the willful way that Absalom lived his life and then ended up in a very dark place. Lord, I pray that you'd help us to learn these lessons. I pray that we would not only learn them, but Lord, that we would live them. That we would live lives that are better informed and more like you. We love you and we thank you for all that you've done for us. Be with us now as we go about this week. Lord, I pray you be with those who are sick. Be with those who are traveling. Be with those who will be traveling in the days ahead. I pray that you would just work and give safety in travel, give health, give strength. We pray in Jesus' name.